we have an eloquent speaker who will give us a rousing history of how this happened in New York State and how it was engineered. Mallory Millett resides in New York City with her husband Thomas of over 20-some years. CEO of several corporations, she is a longtime director of the David Horowitz Freedom Center and sits on the Board of Regents for the Center for Security Policy. But I want to end this introduction with a teaser. This is from her pamphlet. Make sure you walk home with this and a copy of her book. You will be given valuable weapons, okay? And this says, as Mallory is speaking, I was one of the silent, but at last I'm spilling the beans. The girls have been up to something for years, and it's really not good. It's evil. We should be sick to our souls over it. I know I am, and that's why she is here today. Let's welcome Mallory Millett. Thank you, Mallory.
Thank you, Viviana. Well, it's just wonderful to see you all here today. See how many people here love babies, want to see them be born and thrive. Everybody always says, I have to get rid of my cough drop here. Everybody says that you have to start a speech with a joke. I don't know, this is this thing. You always have to start a speech with a joke. But, you know, I tried to think for a couple of weeks I had on my mind, with what joke could I open my speech? And I just had to finally surrender to the fact that this is just not a joking matter.
Amen.
There is nothing funny about this. This is so serious. This is so grave. There is no way that you can exaggerate the ugly proportions of this situation we're facing. I just heard in the last couple of weeks that out of every war that's ever been fought on the planet Earth, now I don't know how they got this statistic because there were prehistoric wars and things, but this was how it was presented to me. Every war that ever happened since human beings have been in conflict has killed 1 billion people. Now here's some perspective for you. Since 1980, that's 7 years after Roe v. Wade. Since 1980, worldwide, we have murdered 1.5 billion people in their mother's wombs. Most of this has been done by pacifists. You know, all the people, the communists, all the people who do the, you know, who really jockey for this whole thing, they're all pacifists. You know, they're all against war. They hate war. They've killed half again more people since 1980 themselves. They're responsible for this than were killed in all the wars on the planet. So I am here today to tell you why I left the left-wing movement, which has crept across America since the 1917 Russian Revolution. It caught me up in the early 60s as it coalesced into a spasm of atheistic communism in our universities. Ultimately, and as planned, it has seized our academies, institutions, and media by the throat until it is now the underlying philosophy of our duped society, twisting American thought into something almost entirely unrecognizable as either American or even Western. We were an Irish-German family, Democrats from the get-go. Their reverence for Franklin Delano Roosevelt bordered on worship, and his death was mourned as if he were a family member. The moaning and weeping throughout every family household of mine was as if God had died. My maternal grandfather, Patrick Henry Feely, founded the town of Farmington, Minnesota. He fathered 8 children and established the largest grain elevator in the state, as well as being Farmington's mayor, postmaster, and the head of the school board. He instituted the Democrat Farmer Labor Party of Minnesota, my maternal grandfather. A perfect example of the American patriarchal pioneer. My mother, the youngest of his 8, was the only one to graduate from college, the University of Minnesota, and she raised her girls as emancipated women to whom she was determined to give college educations. My father, James, didn't go to college. He was a self-taught highway engineer with an uncanny genius for mathematics and drafting, who pulled himself into dazzling success. He was a romantic, handsome figure, a kind of a Gregory Peck type of guy, a tall, black Irish, gorgeous blue eyes, a gift for humor, storytelling, whom his 3 girls idolized. Throughout childhood, I shared bunk beds with my older sister, Kate, a merciless bully whose response to our father's abandonment when she was 13 and I was 7 was to become even more violent and menacing. She would lie in the upper bed raging against men and boys, preaching her anti-male philosophy. We're just as good as any boy, and we can do anything they can do, was her mantra. She carried on about changing the world, changing the world, changing the world. And that came along with getting rich and famous, getting rich and famous, getting rich and famous. She was pathologically sulky and miserable. With 2 angry tomboys as my elders, I wearied of this stuff as I loved being female. I didn't mind boys that much, though they were pesky and bullied me on the way home from school. "It's a Millett, kill it," was the favorite line. I saw them as a little dangerous, so I mostly avoided them till 6th grade, when all at once I felt a strange thrill when seated next to a boy and discovered that I liked it. Once I was aware of the natural dance between male and female, I saw it as great fun. What an adventure, what joy. My elder sister, Sally, married an Air Force guy and had 4 children. They traveled from base to base, eventually ending up in Afghanistan, where her husband, a colonel by them, was Air Force attaché at the American Embassy in Kabul. Kate graduated from the University of Minnesota. She was Phi Beta Kappa, summa cum laude, and then a stint at Oxford, where she did 3 years and 2, and came away with first honors, the only American woman to do so in the entire history of Oxford University. We were all very, very proud of her. However, once she emerged from these institutions, she was bandying a personal philosophy which was weird, atheistic, and disturbingly anti-American. The family shrugged it off as, well, she's always been a little odd. When I told my high school nuns that I planned to follow my mother and sister to University of Minnesota, they said if I studied there, I'd come out an atheist and a communist. I went there anyway, and 4 years later, I came out an atheist and a communist. Just exactly as had my sister Katie 6 years earlier. Sometime later, I was a young divorcee with a small daughter, starting out anew. And since Kate beckoned me to the big city, "Come to New York, we're making revolution. We're starting the National Organization for Women." So I went to be with her. We're changing the world, we're changing the world, we're changing the world. Forgetting my loathing for her in the 9 years since I had last seen her, I foolishly mistook her for sanctuary in my post-divorce disorientation. I had forgotten her emotional despotism. And anyway, I figured she'd grown up. I was staying at her Bowery loft, a bohemian enclave, with her Japanese sculptor husband, Fumio, as she finished her Columbia University PhD thesis, Sexual Politics. It was 1969, and she took me to a meeting at her friend Lila Karp's place in Greenwich Village, a consciousness raising, something practiced in Mao's China. 12 women gathered at a large table. They opened with a type of litany from the Catholic Church, but this time it was Marxism, the church of the far left. "Why are we here today?" the chairwoman asked. "To make revolution," they answered. "What kind of revolution?" she replied. "The cultural revolution," they chanted. "And how do we make cultural revolution?" she demanded. "By destroying the American family," they answered. "How do we destroy the American family?" she came back. "By destroying the American patriarch," they cried exuberantly. "And how do we destroy the American patriarch?" she probed. "By taking away his power." "Well, how do we do that?" she asked. "By destroying monogamy," they shouted. "How can we destroy monogamy?" Their answer left me breathless. "By promoting promiscuity, eroticism, prostitution, abortion, and homosexuality." By promoting these things. They resounded. Was I on planet Earth? Who were these people? They seemed to be fine, young, educated American women. One of them was Kate Stimson. She had been the niece of FDR's Secretary of War. There was a discussion on how to advance these goals by establishing the National Organization for Women. It was clear that these women desired the utter deconstruction of Western civilization. And the only way to do this was to, quote, invade every American institution with the revolution. The media, the universities, the high schools, K-12, school boards, etc. And then the judiciary, the legislatures, the executive branches, even the library system. Remember now, this is 1969. I had come to the city to try my hand at acting and wound up with an experimental theater group called the Playhouse of the Ridiculous, surrounded by homosexuals and drag queens, doing new forms of theater coming out of Europe, the theaters of the ridiculous, the absurd, and the cruel. New York then was teeming with all sorts of exotic intrigues, mainly based on the degradation of the bourgeoisie. Columbia University was coughing up one delusional group after another, inspired by Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, Sigmund Freud, the Frankfurt School, John Dewey, Wilhelm Reich, and Herbert Marcuse. Even Dr. Benjamin Spock, another graduate of Columbia, who in 1946 authored Baby and Child Care. The Vietnam protests were afire. People's marches every other day. Talks of tanks in the street. My sister's crowd was growing by leaps and bounds. By now, Kate's PhD thesis had become a runaway bestseller, Sexual Politics. And on August 31st, 1970, her portrait was on the front of the Time magazine with cover story inside. She was everywhere. Covers of magazines, speeches, talk shows. She was close friends with Angela Davis, Gloria Steinem, Yoko Ono and John Lennon, Simone de Beauvoir, and other such questionable dignitaries swarmed about my sister, as she was the godmother of the revolution. At this point, my friend Lisa Shreve joined my daughters in my household. By now, she and I had adopted Kate's feminism. Revolutionaries, in unison with other denizens of Lower East Side New York, we lived in a grungy Bowery loft on Great Jones Street, right around the corner from Kate and Fumio. Lisa is here today. She's right here. Could you stand up, Lisa? This is another person who lived through and witnessed it all with me. She was with me throughout this entire dark era and can vouch for my truthfulness, some of which is so preposterous that I'm glad I have a living witness. Paul Kengor, who wrote the book Takedown, Viviana, by the way, that's not a book by me. It's this book that you're being handed out today is written by a man named Paul Kengor, who is an expert on communism, says in his book Takedown, quote, that Kate Millett channeled all of her revolutionary nostrums into a campaign to take down traditional marriage and family. He indicts 3 people for the dissembling of our Western society and its institutions: Marx, Marcuse, and Millett. Kate Millett, Bill Ayers, and Mark Rudd spurred the 1960s Columbia riots when they took over the university and shut it down, a fateful era from which academia has not recovered, but which today is reaching its zenith. A week ago, my friend and colleague David Horowitz was scheduled to speak at Berkeley, but because of communist muscle, he suffered being canceled, depriving him of his freedom of speech. This was in the wake of a disgraceful riot which prevented Milo Yiannopoulos from delivering his Berkeley speech. And right now, one of my dearest girlfriends in the entire world, Ann Coulter, is under besiegement because she's attempting to speak at Berkeley. We all have to pray very hard for Ann and her speech because she's determined to give this speech. And speaking of David Horowitz, while agitators Ayers, Millett, and Rudd at Columbia were mixing their deadly activism in the 60s, David Horowitz and Peter Collier were making rumbles at UC Berkeley, California. What we did was terrible, Horowitz says now. He and Collier edited Ramparts magazine, the mouthpiece magazine of the anti-Vietnam movement. He recalls standing with Tom Hayden, a fellow activist who later married Jane Fonda, you remember. And he was standing with Tom Hayden during the People's Park conflict. David says, quote, "It was really ugly. Tear gas cans were flying. Tom turned to David and said, 'You know what we have to do is lure these middle-class kids into situations where the police will crack their heads, and that will make them radical.'" Horowitz said, "I was horrified." Horowitz placed his Ramparts bookkeeper to work for the Black Panthers, and she, the mother of several children, was found dead. Horowitz and members of the Oakland police who worked the case always alleged that the Black Panthers killed her. He became disillusioned with the movement. Quote, "The U.S. left Vietnam and the communists proceeded to slaughter 2.5 million Indo-Chinese peasants. That's when I knew I could no longer be a leftist," Horowitz said. Quote, "They were murderers, and the innocent leftists who weren't murderers would defend them. If you believe you can create heaven on earth through social justice, what lie will you not tell?" He says, quote, "I characterize today's student left as fascist. They want to shut down everyone who disagrees with them. Berkeley is a national disgrace," unquote, David Horowitz. I must inject now that much of this might not have happened without Dr. Benjamin Spock, author of 1946 publication, Baby and Child Care, the second highest bestseller of all time, right after the Bible. He created the new child of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, the spoiled, impulsive, narcissistic, pot-smoking, unpatriotic result of Spock's philosophy of permissiveness and instant gratification. This mixed with Madeleine Murray, the person who took God out of the schoolroom, as well as Kate Millett, who took mommy out of the home. What a witch's brew, no? Wow. Permissiveness and instant gratification. You fold in a motherless home. You mix in godless schools. And what kind of a cake would you expect to get from this? For communists, the atheism element is vital. When God is removed, something else is brought into that space. The secular human ethos, which inescapably invokes evils such as paganism, exotic Eastern cults, weird concepts like EST, bioenergetics, Scientology, and witchcraft. Philosopher Roger Scruton says, quote, "A high culture is the self-consciousness of a society. It contains the works of art, literature, scholarship, and philosophy that establish a shared frame of reference among educated people. High culture is a precarious achievement and endures only if it is underpinned by a sense of tradition and by a broad endorsement of the surrounding social norms. When these things evaporate, high culture is superseded by a culture of fakes. Faking," he goes on, quote, "depends on a measure of complicity between the perpetrator and the victim, who together conspire to believe what they don't believe and to feel what they are incapable of feeling. There are fake beliefs, fake opinions, fake news, fake kinds of expertise. There is also fake emotion, which comes about when people debase the forms and the language in which true feelings can take root, so that they are no longer fully aware of the difference between the true and the false," unquote. Over 100 years ago, Winston Churchill said, quote, "Socialism is a philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. Its inherent virtue is the equal sharing of misery," unquote. Karl Marx said that, quote, Karl Marx speaking now, he said that socialism is the thin end of the communist wedge. Once there's socialists, communism is inevitable. A favorite trick of the left is to play with vocabulary, invent new words, or change meanings. If you can control the words, you can remold society. Infanticide becomes women's health care. Childless becomes child-free. Making love is now having sex or getting laid. Mrs. and Miss become Ms. Abortion is even a euphemism to me. You can abort a picnic, you can abort a plane flight, but infanticide means one thing only: the murder of a child. They play with words in order to redesign society, social engineering. So socialism becomes an accepted idea. It sounds so nice. The word social is so pleasant. Anyway, we defeated communism. No, we didn't. It has sneaked through our society, our schools and universities, and sopping up everything along the way. Also, the left decides certain words may not be used. Oriental. What on earth is wrong with Oriental? Is there something wrong with Occidental? No. So then what's wrong with Oriental? Nothing. It's just a way of shoving your neighbor around. Bullying is an art form of the left. Many people think the recent distortion of our world was inadvertent. It's just sort of the way the story went. But people like David Horowitz and me understand how contrived it was, because we were the people who took part in creating it. Bullying and lying is elementary. It's quintessential to winning the cause. It's more than permissible to lie within the left. It's required and necessary. Norma McCorvey, the Roe in the landmark case you well know, says she never did kill the baby, as she gave birth while they were litigating the case. She tells us she was lying to bolster her case when she said her pregnancy resulted from rape. She said she was used as a pawn by leftist activists. You see, for them, lying is a positive political act. Thomas Sowell, a Black American economist and political philosopher, and my ultimate touchstone of wisdom, I adore Thomas Sowell, says, quote, "One of the common failings among honorable people is a failure to appreciate how thoroughly dishonorable some other people can be and how dangerous it is to trust them, unquote. Once in 1971, our pal Billy Maynard, a gay hippie Lisa and I had befriended, called to say that the Living Theater, arrested in Brazil on dope charges, was released from jail, but our State Department refused them entry to America without someone to take them in. May they stay in your 2,000 square foot loft till they sort themselves out? We were thrilled at the chance to mingle with such storied artists. Founded in 1947, the oldest radical experimental theater company in the US was known worldwide for far-left guerrilla street theater. 9 of them moved in with us. We ourselves were eking out a meager life, each of us holding 2 jobs. I was ushering evenings at the Astor Place Theater and waitressing during the day. Lisa was a cocktail waitress at the Hilton Hotel. So it was quite a shock when day after day we would come back weary from our jobs to find the fridge cleaned out, the place a chaotic mess, with Living Theater folks doing yoga or spread out all over the place, smoking dope or sleeping. They were mostly down in the dumps, highly self-destructive, and mostly suicidal. Most everyone on the left is depressed, besotted with alcohol and drugs. They are miserable, and they want us all to be miserable. Nothing makes them more miserable than happiness. They were brooding acolytes of Karl Marx, atheists to the core. I was beside myself over the effect this would have on my child, not to mention livid, because there was not a morsel left to eat after we'd worked so hard. We would gaze into the empty fridge together as they yapped about the evils of capitalism and the meaninglessness of money. Money is piffle. Money is nothing. Lisa and I, between us, had packed away about 20 hours that day, working ourselves limp for what? Oh, right, for money, which we'd spent on a pantry full of food, already gobbled up by these, by the way, remarkably dirty, disheveled parasites. We endured these insults and humiliations for months until somehow we managed to eject them. Karl Marx dreamed of the destruction, yea, the dissolution of private property, marriage, and religion. Those were the 3 enemies. He stated that, quote, "When atheism begins, communism begins," unquote, Karl Marx. The main target of the communist left is the family. Reich declared the family had to be dismantled. Smash monogamy was his motto. He believed in, quote, children's and teenagers' right to natural love. He was obsessed with the orgasm and the function of the orgasm. He was the first to coin the phrase sexual revolution. Engels wished for, quote, the gradual growth of unconstrained sexual intercourse, and with it a more tolerant public opinion regarding a maiden's honor and a woman's shame. The communist system flows with satanic logic. Various popes over 200 years have called communism, quote, the second oldest religion with the words of temptation, ye shall be as gods, unquote. The popes have also called communism full of deceit and cunning, a satanic scourge, violent and deceptive, a savage barbarity, and the powers of darkness. Bishop Sheen called it the new barbarism. An old friend of mine once remarked that she was seated next to my sister Kate at a dinner and described her as, quote, the darkest character she had ever met, quote, as if she had a black aura, unquote. On January 16, 2015, Pope Francis declared, quote, there are forms of ideological colonization which are out to destroy the family. They are not born of dreams, of prayers, of closeness to God. The family is threatened by growing efforts on the part of some to redefine the very institution of marriage by relativism, by the culture of the ephemeral. Every threat to the family is a threat to society itself. The future of humanity passes through the family, unquote. We have Saul Alinsky, the father of community organizing, another graduate of Columbia. Wow, what a jewel this Columbia University is. A collectivist who came out of Chicago in the 60s preaching Marxist socialism with ideas such as, quote, noble ends justify corrupt means, unquote. Both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama honed their skills on Alinsky. She wrote her Wellesley graduate thesis on Alinsky, who dedicated his book, Rules for Radicals, to Lucifer. Dedicated his book to Lucifer. In a Playboy interview, Alinsky said, quote, if there is an afterlife and I have anything to say about it, I will unreservedly choose hell. Hell would be heaven for me. All my life, I have been with the have-nots. Over here, if you're a have-not, you're short of dough. If you're a have-not in hell, you're short of virtue. Once I get into hell, I'll start organizing the have-nots with a smile. They're my kind of people, unquote. Alinsky demands that leftist radicals strive to, quote, rub raw the resentments of the people, fan latent hostilities to the point of overt expression, and agitate to the point of conflict, unquote. Radicals must cultivate unity against a clearly identifiable enemy who must be caricatured as the personification of evil. Alinsky's formula is pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it, unquote. He tells his acolytes to cultivate in people's hearts a negative, visceral, emotional response to the face of that target, wherever it is seen. He advises them to frame the target as 100% evil. Never concede that an opponent might have admirable qualities. Their present-day target today is Donald Trump. Doing a great job of it, too. While Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels spoiled European thought and history, Saul Alinsky and the gang from Columbia had the same effect on America. In the 50s, Alinsky worked to co-opt Roman Catholic clerics into his movement. Improbably, he enlisted Bishop Bernardine of Chicago and Father John Egan, who later ran Notre Dame University, knitting Alinskyism into Catholic culture, so that now the Catholic colleges and universities are barely recognizable as Catholic. Can you imagine these devout Catholic men being duped by an atheist? But duped they were. Bella Dodd, a well-known communist in 1944, tells of a national communist convention at Madison Square Garden. Quote, I attended a private dinner where Alexander Trachtenberg, a known socialist, got up and said, quote, when we get ready to take the USA, we will not take it under the label of communism or socialism. No. These labels are unpleasant to the American people. We will take the United States under labels we have made lovable. We'll take it under liberalism, under progressivism, under democracy. But take it, we will. After the women at Lila Karp's table in 1969 concocted their plot to invade all of our societal institutions, my sister Kate went about establishing women's studies in nearly every college in America, with 2 of her books as required reading. Niall Ferguson, senior fellow at Stanford and Center for European Studies at Harvard, speaks of the decline and fall of history. Undergraduates are running away from history. compared with 1971, remember, they sat at that table at 1969. He says, compared with 1971, quote, the share of history degrees has gone from 18% in 71 to 9%. Why? Because there's been an enormous increase in historians specializing in women and gender, resulting in gender now being the single most important subfield of the entire American Academy. Cultural history is next, moving from 4% of degrees to 8%, followed by environmental history and the history of race and ethnicity. So the most significant events are utterly ignored. Barely covered are such vital occurrences as the French Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, World War I, World War II, the Cold War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. Instead, we see Harvard offering History, 1954, Emotions in History, which questions the impact of the historian's emotions on his writing of history. Yale offers Witchcraft and Society in Colonial America and History of the Supernatural. Today, MIT offers Communism for Kids. No irony. Seriously, communism for kids. All the while, these left-wing teachers politicize, moralize with insistence on judging, quote, the past by the moral standards of the present. Ferguson states that these teachers, quote, neglect the defining events of modern history in favor of topics that are either arcane or agitprop. Students flee, and the United States of amnesia looms. The women's studies classes my sister invented draw on anthropological and legal history to denounce the institution of marriage and the family, which she called, quote, a patriarchal unit within a patriarchal whole, unquote. She preached a sexual revolution to create, quote, an end to traditional sexual inhibitions and taboos, particularly those that threaten patriarchal monogamous marriage, i.e. homosexuality, illegitimacy, adolescent, child, and pre- and extramarital sexuality. Child sexuality, okay? If your daughter takes a women's studies class, she will be told, be an outlaw, be a damned outlaw. Every law was concocted by dead white men. Be a slut and be proud of it. Young women now wear t-shirts emblazoned with the word slut, just to let us know how liberated they are. Collaborators and friends of Kate's, like Shulamith Firestone and Germaine Greer, advocated along with Kate for the abolition of monogamy, marriage, and the nuclear family. Firestone called pregnancy barbaric. She preferred artificial reproduction and imagined a utopia in which children, like arrows, would roam freely throughout the world. Greer, with a PhD from Cambridge, encouraged women to taste their own menstrual blood and discouraged them from partnering monogamously. Women, Greer claimed, have very little idea of how much men hate them. Further ridiculous statements made by Marxist feminists about men. Quote, the proportion of men must be reduced and maintained at approximately 10% of the human race, unquote. Quote, if life is to survive on this planet, there must be a decontamination of the earth, accompanied by an evolutionary process resulting in a drastic depopulation in the number of males, unquote. Our concern here should become, what of the American man?
Amen.
If your woman is pregnant, you think it's just fine that she's the whole Roman circus rolled into one? She has entire privilege over you? Your son or daughter lives or dies by her whim? You have no say? This is a nightmare of gargantuan dimensions, resulting in the loss of true femininity, a tender, compassionate quality full of comfort, nurture, and gentleness. Just because the people around you have collapsed into evil doesn't mean that truth has lost its meaning. These women are driven by violent impulses toward men and patriarchy in order to establish a matriarchy, because if women ran our world, there would be no more war. A simple-minded error of logic. All they've done is enervate our men, destroy masculinity, and thus embolden our enemies who now see us as easy pickings. No nation is easier to overwhelm than one which has feminized its men. Kenneth Minogue, in National Review, November 18, 1991, wrote, I love this, so funny, great. Quote, an ideological movement is a collection of people, many of whom could hardly bake a cake, or fix a car, or sustain a friendship or a marriage, or even do a quadratic equation, yet they believe they know how to rule the world. The university has become the natural habitat of the ideological enthusiast, a kind of adventure playground carefully insulated from reality. It has become the institutional base for civilizational self-hatred, unquote. The definition of insanity is the pursuit of delusion at all costs, while the definition of sanity is the pursuit of reality at all costs. Delusion, pursued at all costs, reigns supreme on the left wing. On a site titled Love Stinks, one Elizabeth Lewis writes, it's no longer in the interest of our species to have heterosexuals fornicating. We must not proliferate offspring. We need no breeding of humans which endanger our existence. Homosexuality should be here to stay for centuries to get the population under control. We can referendum heterosexuality sometime in 2513 or so. I say explore your own sex, unquote. In the summer of 1970, my sister Kate decided that she, Lisa Shreve, and I should make the first all-female film. It would be only women present at all times. Even the person delivering sandwiches from the delicatessen had to be female. This became an ordeal at the hands of Kate's delusions, which nearly killed us. If not from heat stroke, suicide, or homicide, then sheer despair and exhaustion. Every kind of despotism, chaos, and irrational violence which Kate could manufacture fell down upon us all during one of the hottest summers on record. Called 3 Lives, the movie profiles 3 women. Lisa's mom, Lillian Shreve, a housewife and mother, who also had a career as a chemist, a Marxist lesbian named Robin Mead, and myself. Kate made each of us 3 into graphic symbols of her own worldview, which had little to do with the women being profiled. It was bold-faced communist propaganda. She took 11 hours of footage on me and cut it into an uncanny half-hour portrait of herself, stunning in its artifice. Same with the other 2 women. Lisa's mother never got over the betrayal. In 1973, Roe v. Wade became law, and we were all elated. The result was that everyone ran right out and committed infanticide. It became the new birth control. Lisa and I were in the swim. She had 1, and over the next couple of years, I, to my eternal shame, committed 2 infanticides. Sexual revolution was in full bloom, you know? Freedom, you know? Speaking of delusion, One Halloween night, Kate invited Lisa and me to her loft for a party. We went around the corner to her place, mounted the 3 stories, to find a long, low table in the middle of her dwelling with 12 placemats, each of which held a plate under a bowl of water with a large, sharp knife set across that. We could hear the sound of knife sharpening. At each place sat an entirely naked woman, cross-legged on a large cushion. One of the women at the end of the table had a gigantic live boa constrictor wrapped around her nude self. It must have been 10 feet long and at least 8 to 10 inches in diameter. Lisa and I were dumbstruck, appalled. We had removed our shoes as required. Kate invited us to join them, but we muttered something about just observing. And as they took their eyes off us to resume their ritual, we tiptoed to our shoes and crept out, running down those flights like bats out of hell, my feet barely touching the steps as we burst out onto the Bowery, chased by Satan himself, shaking and huffing in shock and terror. One Sunday morning, my phone rang at 7 a.m. "This is Vanessa Redgrave." I thought it was a joke. Okay, not funny. Who is this? 7 a.m. We're sleeping. No, this is Vanessa. I'm a friend of Kate's. Is Mallory there? Then I recognized her voice. Still, I was vexed, as this is not the hour nor the day for a call out of the blue from a perfect stranger. She said Kate had told her I was in a comedy group working clubs around town. 6 of us had put together a precursor to Saturday Night Live called State of Shock, which dealt with issues of the day from the leftist perspective. Vanessa was putting together a day of leftism at a school on the Lower East Side with panels, speeches, and she thought we could provide comic relief. We got together to talk. She watched a rehearsal, and we agreed to do the job. From the first moment we spoke, I was struck by how odd she was. She spoke nonstop in a drab monotone while staring at a spot just to the side of my head, never looking into my eyes, and every word was propaganda. The People's Committee for the People's Benefit concerning the people's collective action of the whatever, always a kind of gobbledygook about this conference and that committee, and always the word peoples. I could never make out quite what she was saying. Always this dull monotone, like a robot that had been misprogrammed with nonsense. She called me constantly and at ungodly hours like 6 or 7 a.m., keeping me on the phone, straining to grasp the meaning of these long communist diatribes. A lot was about Palestine, over which she was rabid with much anti-Semitism. It was beyond wearying. I could drop off into a doze and she hadn't a clue. But the real shock came the day of our gig at a large public school auditorium in New York City, in the United States of America. When I saw this room was draped floor to ceiling, all along the walls from front to back, a huge high school auditorium. From front to back with these enormous red flags blazing with the yellow hammer and sickle. I thought we were in Soviet Russia. What on earth? The entire room wrapped in the communist flag. What a wake-up. I was apoplectic. I was into the revolution, the movement, yes, but no one had ever flashed that flag. A sickening feeling came over me. As I mounted the stage, the American fathers, sisters, sons, uncles, aunts, brothers, and husbands who died fighting communism all over the world swarmed my mind as everywhere I looked, I saw the violently red hammer and sickle dancing around my eyes. I saw Vanessa a few times more. My daughter was in a play, and Vanessa came with her adorable little boy, Carlo, son of movie star Franco Nero, whom she had pointedly conceived out of wedlock, a communist statement about free love and the obsolescence of marriage and family. Her speech continued to be this droning, humorless propaganda, and I began to edge my way away from her and the left and cautiously toward God. Then there was the Black Panther weekend. Kate drove us in some camera equipment in her blue convertible to the University of Pennsylvania for a Black Panther weekend. As we arrived, Lisa picked up a camera to shoot some pamphlets on Iraq. Without warning, she was violently thrown to the concrete by an enormous screaming panther. She flew through the air to a hard landing. Kate ran to the attacking thug with obsequious apologies, explaining we were invited to come and film. No apology from the screaming, attacking thug. The weekend was a long string of vile racist behavior, insults, and contempt aimed at our whiteness. It was an exercise in filthy-mouthed, chaotic mob behavior with unsanitary conditions and disgusting food doled out to long lines of hapless attendees as if we were fourth-class citizens. It was sickening to observe my sister Kate's kowtowing to out-and-out hoodlums. Lisa's parents, who lived in Philly, were in Florida, so Kate invited some of these horrors to their embarrassingly bourgeois townhouse, where we cooked for them. It was about 3 men and 2 women eating in Lisa's mom's kitchen, yakking on about race, politics, rampant with degrading, really filthy language. They were openly menacing in their hatred for whites. Kate responded with hand-wringing, begging obsequiousness. She was bowing to them, hanging her head, looking up to them in a pleading manner, even in tears at times, struggling to prove that she was not a racist. She carried on about working for civil rights and how her Japanese husband was also oppressed because he was Japanese. We finally got them out of there with such relief. But next morning at 7 a.m., the doorbell rang. To our horror, Kate let them in. They claimed they'd left something behind. Once inside, they spread about the house into every room, opening every drawer, casing every square inch, Lillian's jewelry box, every closet. Lisa was in shorty pajamas, and one of the men grabbed her arm, gruffly uttering a grunting noise. Had they come to rob and rape us? They could find nothing of their own. Someone said, well, we'll just take this till you find ours, and grabbed Fumio's Nikon camera and ran out and up the street. We gave chase, and the one man in our party managed to get it back. We believe his presence was what diverted them from rape, as some sense of that was always present. Our terror was overwhelming, and it really took us a long time to recover. That's the revolution, we asked ourselves. As soon as one accepts God, everything changes. Much later, Lisa converted to Catholicism and went on to make a career as a documentary film editor. She was editing a documentary on Mother Teresa and asked my husband and me would we like to meet her, and we jumped at the chance. The other women Lisa was with had known Mother for some years and told us that once someone asked her what was the worst thing going on in the world, and she had quickly replied, abortion. This time when we met with her, they asked her the same question, and she said, quote, the taking of the Holy Eucharist in the hand was the worst thing in the world. We were surprised because this form of communion was church-sanctioned, and many people had adopted it. But upon contemplation, we saw her exact meaning. We have lost the sense of the sacred. It is only because we have crossed the sacred line of humanity, the taboo which forbids the murder of one's own son or daughter, in a mother's womb. The sense of the sacred has been crushed. As Dostoevsky says, if God does not exist, then anything is permissible, unquote. Lisa and I came to see all this lesbianism, witchcraft, atheistic politics as a psychotic dimension. It is just plain crazy to convince women that not only is it good to murder your own child in the womb, but it's imperative that you buck up and have the courage to do it. For the sake of your own future, but also for the sake of the planet, because one of the urban myths soaking its way through our world in the 70s was that there was a population explosion looming ahead of us in a dark and threatening future. The popular sense all around was that by the year 2000, there would not be a square acre of unoccupied land. There'll be some people here who remember this. There would be no food. Again, the delusionary thought was that the population explosion was an inescapable reality where there would be no water left. Just way too many hungry, desperate, dirty, thirsty barbarians grappling over the last 2 acres on Earth. It held just as important a place in urban thinking as does global warming today. Identical. It was an absolute, it was beyond discussion, a scientific fact, and we'd all better get on a stick and solve it. Why, as a decent woman, would you bring an innocent person into this nightmare? Don't have kids. Babies became the enemy of mankind, of women, and of your future. What a perfect moment, perfect, to shove Roe v. Wade down the throats of Americans. It was a good thing to kill babies. It was the kind, merciful, and conscientious thing to do. It's your body. Oh, but wait, it's not. For what human body has 2 beating hearts, 4 eyes, 2 noses, 4 legs, 20 fingers, and 20 toes? Someone once said to me, "You grant too much power to those women around Lila Karp's table in 1969 Greenwich Village." No, but it's nothing new. The power of a handful of people is immense. 7 men sitting on a 9-person court made Roe v. Wade the law of the land. Hitler demolished Europe, starting with a handful of brown shirts. Whereas Jesus Christ, with only 12 other guys and a few women, has saved billions and billions on Earth. One of the most egregious errors of the left is the denial of human nature and the inherent power of one individual. They're always calling for unity. Can't we all agree, they ask? What laughable nonsense is this? People will always quarrel. It's in our nature. Whenever you hear the word collective, run. Run for your life from the word collective. Unity describes groupthink, where all are in agreement, completely unnatural as well as impossible. That's totalitarianism. That is the description of fascism. Our American constitutional system is a beauty because it takes into account that we are divisive, difficult, and argumentative by nature, and it allows us safe venues in which to disagree and argue passionately. That's how to form a sane and balanced society. It's how we arrive at law and order. It's the pursuit of reality at all costs. The monstrous lies, permutations, awkward configurations, and outright psychic gymnastics through which the mind must struggle in order to throw in with the left are astonishing. Faust barters his soul to Mephistopheles, who bids him with the words, "Evil, be thou my good." On April 26, 2013, Barack Obama, the first president to address Planned Parenthood, thanked that group, which murders 300,000 babies a year. But Barack added, God bless you, to them. Evil be thou my good. That same year, on June 20th, 2013, in the New York Times, a woman described the ending of her son's budding life as a moment for which she is grateful. I made sure my son died in a warm and loving place inside of me. Evil be thou my good. Nancy Pelosi, who laughably calls herself Catholic, described infanticide as sacred ground. Evil be thou my good. Not St. Mother Teresa's good by a long shot. St. Mother Teresa said, no one is safe around a mother who would murder her own child. And I say, Satan calls evil my good. Christ calls it crucifixion. The ugly reality of this desecration of the womb and the child within is so jolting to any responsible sentient person that it necessarily fractures the soul of anyone who succumbs to infanticide, because the appearance of this child is inconvenient. What petty purpose is this? The dignity of a human being is in direct proportion to that person's relationship to the sacred. The purpose of the sacred is to radiate dignity upon the perceiver, and it is the perceiver who grants and bestows such dignity to the sacred. Our system grants equal rights to all Americans, yet leftists have twisted it into meaninglessness. A friend of ours gave birth to a little girl in the 6th month. She weighed 1.5 pounds and could be held entirely in the palm of her daddy's hand. They named her Dana, and they fought their hearts out to make her live. We all prayed so hard. It cost $500,000 to bring Dana through to where she could come home, and then for years, more incalculable struggle and funds to deal with her attending problems. Today, she's a very lovely 5'10" young lady with a normal life. She's getting married on November 11th this year. Yet women who don't want to face reality have the right to murder their baby when it's 2 months further along in gestation than was Dana. So, what? Is Dana a more important soul, worth all the money, struggle, and heartache it took to bring her into full existence, while the inconvenient baby is thrown out with the trash? A worthless creature not meriting the bother? Where is the equality under the Constitution? It's applied willy-nilly, all according to the whim of one woman alone. Not even a jury of 12. One woman alone decides this. Bishop Sheen said, quote, "The level of civilization is always the level of its womanhood." Always the level of the womanhood of the civilization. Everything changed with the pill. Peter Collier and David Horowitz report that the campaign against monogamy and for enforced promiscuity, think of that, enforced promiscuity by the Bill Ayers Bernadine Dorn Weathermen Collective was initiated by the women in the gang. The normalizing of infanticide begins with the dehumanization of the unborn person, which makes it easy to tell oneself that this is a benefit in the protection of women's rights. Through time, the practitioner's heart grows harder and harder, making it possible. Through time, the practitioner's heart grows harder and harder, making it possible to perpetrate the ugliest of crimes against humanity without a twinge of conscience. It's particularly easy when it unleashes a tsunami of cash into the hands of these practitioners who operate killing mills with impunity. Child sacrifice always appears with paganism. Planned Parenthood, which performs 300,000 infant murders a year, totally contrary to their claim, does no mammograms, no prenatal care, no pap smears, none. This is an out-and-out flat lie. These predators have developed a perfectly heinous formula. Early child sex education, indiscriminate promiscuity preached, make youngsters adept at contraception, and when it fails, as it does 54% of the time, you can always kill the consequences. Therefore, in the primary schools, very young children are led down the road of desensitization. G.K. Chesterton wrote, "The worst criminals are not murderers and thieves. The worst criminals are intellectuals who give the wrong food to children and pervert them." Friedrich Engels' dream of unrestrained sexual intercourse is manifest. At last, sexual revolution, free love, pansexuality, everything allowed as the Planned Parenthood killing mills grind away in a perpetual river of desperate clients paying piles of unending cash. Minority communities are particularly hard hit. In New York City, 2012, there were more black babies killed by infanticide than were born. Killing on this industrial scale is America's greatest moral calamity since slavery, and it must be stopped. Jesus said, quote, "I came so that they might have life and have it more abundantly," unquote. After 44 years of legalized infanticide, continually promoted by the American left, out-of-wedlock births have increased and the plight of poor women has worsened. The rate of marital and relationship breakups after the killing of a baby is 40 to 75%, caused by the breakdown of intimacy and trust. As you all well know, this blossomed from Margaret Sanger's racist eugenics to stop the multiplying of the unfit, to breed a race of thoroughbreds, to create a proper science of breeding so as to stop impoverished non-white women from, quote, breeding like weeds, unquote. In a New York Post piece this past March 19th, titled "The Born Supremacy," Reed Tucker wrote, in the next 20 years, we may be able to create perfect babies, boasting Hollywood looks and genius IQs, without eggs, sperm, or sex. No love in the procreating of people anymore. Could this lead to a master race or a healthier future? Margaret Sanger and Saul Alinsky join hands smiling in hell. All of those who have an inkling of the true nature of love find ourselves menaced on all sides by barbarity. Without, we have bloodthirsty Islamic terrorists who dream of extinguishing us forever. Within, our babies are stalked by their own mothers. This springs from the callous, damaged hearts of these Marxist feminist dupes who hire strangers to extinguish innocent, eager hearts, persons who spring from eggs inside their very own wombs. The black stain of this barbarous business, a money machine, I must emphasize, a money machine, a money machine, a money machine. This has prohibited entrance to planet Earth of 60 million American men and women who, had they been born, would have eliminated our struggles and worries over Social Security or the workforce. Father Alfred Delp, a German Jesuit who was executed in 1945 by a Nazi firing squad, wrote this, quote, "The kingdom of God is where humanity is in a state of grace and all things move in divine order. Human needs are met by God's abundance. Human limitations are dissolved by God's power. Human rashness is tamed by God's discipline. All this is part of the kingdom of God. It is a quickening in our innermost heart, passing from person to person to person. It is a silent grace which nevertheless gives impetus to word and deed, unquote. One of my very best friends, Father George Rutler, whom I asked for a statement for this talk, said simply, quote, "There is no more important figure in the world than a mother," unquote. The prayer probably said most often over all the earth is to our Holy Mother. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. The fruit of her womb was Jesus, the Savior of humankind, who said, "Whatever you do unto the least of these, my brethren, you do unto me." Unquote. This means that every person in utero is another fruit of the womb, Jesus. This means each infanticide performed is another crucifixion of our blessed Savior. Thus, Planned Parenthood commits annually 300,000 crucifixions of Christ. Here's the real choice scenario, okay? You choose a deserving man. You choose to spend time getting to know each other. You meet each other's family. You choose a date. You marry before your friends and family. And then you give birth to a beautiful child with the consideration that that person deserves upon coming into this extremely difficult exercise called life.